But I think when people are back at the baseline and you're trying to keep them back, people are not often enough using the sidelines and hitting hard angles to the corners to really make people reach and try to hit resets from, all the way out here or even all the way to the sides of the court. And keep in mind that when you're up at the kitchen and they're back, you can use as much angle as you want, because outside of some pros, people aren't hitting ATPs from the baseline or behind the baseline. So at the kitchen, you want to be a little more conservative with the angles you use because you don't want to give up ATPs. All right, so before we hop into this show, I have to talk to you guys about Selkirk nets. They've been huge for me, huge for my game. I had a long history of playing on temporary nets that were just not satisfactory. I've been in this game now for a little bit, and I remember when I was playing with temporary nets where if you hit it, an inch from the top of the net, if you hit it hard, it's going over. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's just not a high quality net. And I was something of a Colin Johns as it related to those net cords, just getting mad all the time at them. And it was a pet peeve of mine. And then when Selkirk came out with their nets, I couldn't have been happier. And the truth is, they came out with their nets before I was signed with Selkirk, and I had already gotten one. So this is a pretty genuine thing. I mean, they do have the best nets, and I feel pretty happy to be able to advertise Selkirk nets because I know they're the best, and if you've played with them, you know they're the best. So shout out to Selkirk, and be sure to get Selkirk nets at selkirk.com/collections/nets. Okay, so now we are going to, well, first of all, I was about to get into it without even introducing the show. So that just shows how locked in I am on the coaching. So anyway, this is the James Ignatowich Show, if you didn't read the title of the episode. So that's what we're doing, James Ignatowich Show. We're going to get right into it because this is one of my favorite parts of the game and something that I am particularly good at, I would say. I hope my opponents would say the same thing, which is making it tough for your opponent to get into the kitchen line. So this is a very nuanced topic. We're going to try to cover a few things in this episode, and it's important because obviously, people, I'm sure if you have coaching or if you've watched a lot of these, people will say that the third shot drop and transition zone is like the most important part of the game in pickleball. Getting to the kitchen, right? You want to get to the kitchen because if you can't get to the kitchen, you're probably not going to win, and that applies at almost every level, and that's true. So everybody talks about, well, okay, let's work a lot on our third shot drops. Let's work on our transition, which are called the third shot drop and the fifth and the seventh, the transitional shots, right? Well, nobody really talks too much about the fourths and the sixth, which are the shots that are keeping people back when they're hitting drops and when they're in transition. So we're going to talk about that here. And it's funny because when I teach these clinics, a lot of people are saying, well, I was taught that when somebody's back, you just want to hit it to their feet, right? If somebody's back at the baseline and you want to make it tough for them to get into the kitchen, just hit it at their feet. And that's the key. And there is a place for hitting it at people's feet, but that is not the final answer, I would say. I think that something that is very important when you are trying to keep people back is making them reach to either side, and actually oftentimes to the backhand side, because it's very tough to make that reset, especially, as you go down in level, the movement might get a little worse, the footwork might get a little less clean. And if you can make people reach from side to side, it becomes a lot tougher to reset that ball into the kitchen than if you just hit it directly in between their legs or in between their shoulders, and they can just reset that one from their feet. And think about it this way too. If most players are taught to just hit it directly at somebody's feet to keep them back, well, then you would think that a lot of players have quite a bit of practice resetting balls that are right at their feet, right? If everybody hit every single ball right to my feet, I'd be great at hitting balls at my feet, not so great at hitting balls that are, on my wings all the way over here, reaching out that far. And I think that applies to almost everybody because for the most part, when people are hitting fourths and sixths, they are going to other people's feet. And that's just what they've been taught to do, and that's okay. But I try to tell people at the clinics, you got to mix it up. You don't want to always hit it directly at somebody's feet when they're trying to come in, because certain players are also much more comfortable taking resets and taking balls in transition off the bounce right at their feet and just kind of bunting them into the kitchen. A lot of people are a lot more comfortable hitting that shot than if you hit it to their knees. so that they have to take the reset out of the air. I think that's a very underrated part of the game. And I've talked about this already, but for me, I feel a lot more comfortable resetting balls that are at my feet than at my knees, because if I can let it bounce and take it while it's rising, it's a lot easier for me to reset that one in than it is if somebody hits it right at my knees and I have to take it out of the air as a volley reset. So that's something you should also look into. Try to know your opponent and get a feel for, are they better at resetting right when it's at their feet or at their knees, or maybe if they're reaching to their right or their left. All these things are important. But I think when people are back at the baseline and you're trying to keep them back, people are not often enough using the sidelines and hitting hard angles to the corners to really make people reach and try to hit resets from, all the way out here or even all the way to the sides of the court. And keep in mind that when you're up at the kitchen and they're back, you can use as much angle as you want, because outside of some pros, people aren't hitting ATPs from the baseline or behind the baseline. So at the kitchen, you want to be a little more conservative with the angles you use, because you don't want to give up ATPs. And this applies a little more at the 4.5 plus level. But from the baseline, nobody's hitting ATPs. So use those angles, really make people run and make people reach, because I know better than anybody, it's a lot tougher to hit a reset if you're reaching or if you're on the run than if it's hit directly to you. So I would say that yes, you want to hit some fourths and six right to people's feet, but you don't want to hit all of them, to the same spot. You want to mix it up. You want to make them hit some at their knees. You want to some people hit some while they're reaching to a corner. All of these things are important, because mixing it up and giving people no rhythm is very, very helpful. And I think that at the 4.045 level, it's actually even more important than it is at the pro level. So keep that in mind for sure. And we're also going to talk about putting the ball away by using the sidelines. I think that, we'll not even just talk about putting the ball away using the sidelines. We're going to talk about another great way to put the ball away, which is making it bounce right at the baseline too. So here are some do's and don'ts when it comes to putting overheads away and finishing the point. The last place you want to put it is in the middle and sort of short, sort of like trying to spike it, because the ball doesn't bounce that high. And if there's one thing about a pickleball that's way different from a tennis ball, is that when it bounces, it slows down dramatically, okay? Because this is a wiffle ball. It's not really meant to be hit so hard. And when it bounces, it kind of slows down and it makes it a lot easier. So to put a ball away, to put an overhead away or a high fourth away, and you're not going for the angle, because some people aren't comfortable for the angle or comfortable going for the angle, and that's okay. The deeper, the better. So if you make it bounce a foot from the baseline, that is perfect, because it's not bouncing until it's almost already past the person. And if it bounces 5 feet in front of the person or 6 feet in front of the person, by the time your opponent has hit that ball, the ball will have slowed down dramatically. So if you make it bounce deeper, that is way, way more effective as it relates to putting the overhead or high fourth away. So if you want to go for some depth instead of angle, really go for depth and try to really get comfortable hitting the overhead, making it bounce within 2 or 3 feet of the baseline, because outside of certain pros, that ball is really not coming back. If it bounces that deep, it's very tough to get it back, especially because, let's be honest, most pickleball courts, the fences are too tight behind the baseline. There's only 5 or 6 feet behind the baseline sometimes. And if you can make it bounce that close to the baseline, you're probably going to be in a good spot. So that's option 1. Option 2 is using the sidelines. And that is usually something you want to do when you're hitting it cross court. So if you're on the right, going to the other, right side, going cross court, because you actually have some more space there. And if you're on the left, going inside out to the other left side. So if you're on one sideline and you hit an overhead to the other corner, the opposite corner, you actually want to make that one bounce short so that it will bounce and then it will go right to the side fence and they're not going to get it back. So if you watch the pros, a guy like J.W. Johnson, for example, he's great at putting the ball away using the angles, because it will bounce a foot from the sideline. And since it's coming from the other side, that geometry of the court will make it so that it'll bounce and then it's gone. So, and that this only applies when you're going cross court. If you're going from the middle, if you're putting an overhead away that's kind of directly in the middle, I would just go for depth for the most part, unless you really feel comfortable finding a cross court angle there. It's tougher to do so. So if you're in the middle, try to put the overhead away for depth, close to the baseline. And then if you're on the sidelines, maybe look to use the sideline. Again, if you feel comfortable. For me, I like to just kind of go as deep as I can right to the baseline, but I would try to do both. And if you don't feel like you have as much power, that's when you really want to use these sidelines to put the overhead away, because you don't need to hit it as hard. If both of your opponents are right at the baseline and then you're right up at the kitchen line hitting a cross court overhead that bounces, again, we're wanting this overhead to bounce like 3 feet from the kitchen line when we use the sidelines. So the middle one, that's going to go as deep as possible. The ones where we use the angles and use the sidelines, we want that to be as short as possible. And we'll have visual representations of this in my newsletter and on my YouTube channel. Newsletters in my Instagram bio, just to make sure we're all clear on how to get my newsletter, because my newsletter is my baby and we're going to be grinding and making it the best newsletter in the game in pickleball. And it's all about coaching, by the way. I'm not telling you guys what I'm having for lunch or breakfast. I know you don't care about that. This is a coaching newsletter strictly. So it's in my Instagram bio. You can also sign up at james-ignatowich.com, and it'll have a big link right there to say, hey, sign up for the newsletter. That's how you do it. So anyway, when you're putting away those overheads from the sideline, you want them to bounce cross court 2 feet past the kitchen line, 3 feet past the kitchen line, maybe as short as possible, so that when it bounces, it's going straight to the other court. And you're going to have to say, ball, please, ball on your court, because it is gone, and that's how you put that one away. So that is the main stuff about putting overheads away. Let's see. So we've talked about fourths and sixths. We've talked about overheads. We're kind of just talking about the stuff that, these are my strengths. The last couple episodes, we've talked a little bit about drops. Maybe that's not really my strength, but I tried to coach you on it. Hopefully I gave you some good advice. What else am I good at? Well, I would say another thing is, if you have a high backhand and you want to put a high backhand away, you really, really should get comfortable using two hands there, because the higher you go with a backhand with one hand, the weaker you're going to get. And if you've got a one-handed backhand counter, I have tried one-handed backhand counters and I've tried two-handed backhand counters, and I'm pretty confident in assuming that the wider you go and the higher you go, the harder that it is to hit that shot hard, right? If you put a two-hand on it when it's wide, it's easy. If you put a two-hand on it when it's high, it's easy. It becomes a lot easier to get a lot of power there, because that left hand will provide a ton of power. It's almost like, a high backhand with one hand is this, a high backhand with two hands is a mix of this plus a lefty overhead in a way. You'll get way more power. For me, I'm always going to default to using two hands, the wider and higher it is. So if you're up at the kitchen line and your opponents are back at the baseline, I would highly recommend using two hands on that backhand when it's high, and really just going for depth and pace, hitting it harder and deeper it is, the less likely they are to get it back. So that's another key for putting the balls away. Also, if you have a two-handed backhand and it's wide and you want to put it away, it's a lot easier to use that angle. If you go like this with one, you have to use your wrist. And using a lot of wrist is generally not advised in pickleball. But if it's wide and you use two, you can really go hard cross-court angle and make it tough for them to get it back. And again, the ball might end up on the other court, so you might have to apologize for hitting the ball to the other player's court. Hopefully you've got fences in between each court. But yeah, using the sidelines is always going to be helpful when you want to put the ball away, because again, we're not really risking any ATPs. If people are ATPing you, if you're a 4-0, 4-5, and somebody's ATPing you from the baseline, that's too good. Leave that in the comments. Tell me that that's happening, and I will try to give you some different advice and try to help you out. Because if that's a problem you're facing, then we've got to work on that somehow. I need to know my audience. So yeah, and I would say, when you're putting those balls away, try to, power is important and going for pace is important, but I would not sacrifice placement for power. So I'm not saying placement over power, because power when you're putting the ball away is very important. But if you get to the point where you're hitting it, so hard that you can't really place it at all, and you're making it bounce too short sometimes and you're missing it sometimes, then you should dial back the power, because there is a balance there. And you don't want to be missing a lot of these shots, because putting the ball away, you're already in an advantageous position. Your opponents are already at the baseline. You should be winning almost all of those points. And any shot that you miss is not a point that you're going to win, obviously. So that is it. I really have nothing else for you guys today in this episode. Thank you for watching. As always, this is the James Ignatowich Show, but more importantly, this is Selkirk TV. So like and subscribe to Selkirk TV. And if you have any questions, anything you want me to cover in any future episodes, feel free to leave those in the comments, because the best comments and the best questions I will probably be answering in my podcasts on here. And if you have any, real questions about maybe getting better or wanting to learn from the newsletter, well, you know how to subscribe to the newsletter, james-ignatowich.com, or the links in my bio. Check it out, because the newsletter is going to be, and it already is actually pretty good. We've got 3 people working on it now. We've got a whole team. So that's why I plug it so much. I'm only plugging the newsletter so much because I do know that it's good and it's free and it's going to make you better. If it wasn't free, I wouldn't be plugging it so much. Don't worry. That's all. So thanks for watching, guys.